Hello, Pamela.
Hello, Natalie. Thank you for having me.
Hi, yeah, I'm so happy. I should say that you're actually the first episode after Hanukkah. We didn't have a live episode for 2 weeks, and so I actually missed it. So thank you. I'm happy that we're coming back with you and that we're going to dive in some very interesting questions and topics, and it's going to be fascinating. So whoever is listening, make sure to stay until the end because this is really an interesting conversation that we're going to have with Pamela. But before we start, let me introduce you to Pamela Laufer-Ukeles. I should have asked you how to say your last name. I'm sorry. How do you say your last name?
Ukeles.
Ukeles. Okay, thank you. That's one question I didn't ask you before. Well, we always learn. So Pamela is originally from the US, where she was a professor of law at the University of Dayton. Today, Pamela lives in Israel and she's a professor of law and healthcare administration at the Academy College of Law and Science in Hod HaSharon in Israel. She teaches feminist legal theory, bioethics, healthcare reform, and elder law, among other subjects. There were many more. I had to remove some, but those were the main ones that grabbed my attention. She wrote many books. That also was a whole list. And so if you want to know the whole list, there's a website that we'll share so you'll know which books Pamela wrote. But the latest one is on children's rights called Global Reflections on Children's Rights and the Law. She's passionate and does extensive research on surrogate motherhood, collaborative family making, and adoption, among many other subjects. Again, there were a lot of subjects. Pamela has a BA in philosophy and economics from Columbia and her JD from Harvard Law School. Wow. So when we read that, we're like, who do we have here? Like, who is this person that has studied so much, is teaching extensive subjects, and we feel like we want to take each topic and just dive in right with you and ask you tons of questions. So I'm so really happy that you're here, Pamela. Thank you for being here.
And actually, I mentioned to you, and I thought I would share with the audience that normally what people ask me about are the subjects, and I lecture a lot, and I go to conferences, and I talk about the subjects. But this is really actually my very first experience where the topic is beyond the work that I do, beyond my writing, but people actually want, or you maybe ask me questions about my life, which is something that is new for me. And just thinking about how, like, in the arc of life, you get to a certain age where people not only want to know things about what you've written, but they also want to know a little bit about your life, which is interesting and nice.
It is interesting, and I'm happy that you're sharing this because it's also a reflection. I mean, I think we're about the same age. I just turned 49, closing to 50, right? And it's like the type of time in life that you start saying, from my experience, or within many years, you start talking like older people, like the people you used to listen to when you were younger, right? But I think it's true that there is something that we learn from life, and that's also why I started this podcast. It's because there are so many people that have things to share, and also so many people that have things that they want to learn in different areas and different topics. And so first of all, I thank you for being brave to do that for the first time. And I know it's not easy because if your comfort zone is talking about the subject that you teach, now it's a different area. It's a more personal, more vulnerable also topics.
Definitely.
We're gonna try to make it comfortable and not too painful. We're gonna try. So the first thing I would love for you to share with us, because I think it's interesting when we look at your bio and we look at your journey and we look at everything that you've achieved, on paper, we see that, there is a lot of achievement. There's a lot of, Columbia and Harvard and teaching in university and the whole, academy. So there is a lot of things that you can be proud of. But what I loved about the talking points when I asked you, like, what do you want to talk about? You spoke about growing up in a family or in an environment with high expectation. And I wanted to talk about this because is this how this happens? Like, is this what you are today, the result of high expectation and strong, you speak about strong ideal and meritocracy education. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about how did it all start, and is it from that education that you got that you are where you are today, and do you believe that this is the thing that was the good thing for you?
You know, you don't know what makes you exactly the way you are, the nature versus nurture kind of thought. So when you ask that question, I'm like, oh, I don't know how I got to be the way I am. But when I look back at my life and I think about where I am now and how I got here, yeah, I definitely think about being raised in a home by a self-made Holocaust survivor and a mother who grew up very poor. And there was an overwhelming belief in the ability for hard work to allow you to overcome anything. That if you just put the time in and the work in, and you you have this obligation to meet your potential. And I think that my father, Zichrono Livracha, really gave me that gift, and it allowed me to kind of have the perseverance. And it takes a lot of time and patience and effort, but I felt like I was always, I definitely, the mantra of hard work will get you there. Allowed me to have big goals, big dreams, and to feel like I could get there if I just put the time in and the work in. And that's definitely something that drove me.
Wow. Yeah, that,
Yeah.
that is definitely something that you need in order to get to where you are today. But would you say that, you use the word, full potential. So do you think that full potential and hard work go together? Because here, you know that we are in the Born to Do business community, and we speak about what you're born to do. We speak about your purpose, your soul purpose, your potential. And is it really connected to hard work? Is hard work and full
Mm.
potential connected? Can we get to our full potential without hard work, or is hard work always getting us to our full potential?
So I think that's like a very appropriate question for me, actually, because look, I put in the hard work and I graduated top of my class at Columbia and Harvard, and I was a law clerk and a law professor, and I spent 3 years studying Jewish law and teaching, and I was all these things, all these degrees and all these accomplishments, and I had Fulbright fellowships, and and then all of a sudden I'm 28 and I'm a new immigrant to Israel. I have a small baby and I'm a religious woman in an Orthodox world, and none of those things really seemed right. I mean, all those things prepared me for a certain life, I guess, maybe in New York, in a certain way. But all of a sudden, I found myself a new immigrant. My qualifications weren't right. All that hard work, and I knew the wrong law. I was viewed as an outsider. People didn't know me despite all the writing I had done. My Hebrew wasn't good enough. And I was like, all of a sudden, perceived as someone who didn't fit in. And I was like, how did I get here? That whole meritocracy thing actually wasn't so applicable. And it was like a dark place because of that, because I grew up thinking that if you work hard, you could get whatever you want. And here I found myself in totally uncharted waters, and I really had to figure out how to reinvent myself. And I felt like I did feel like moments of losing myself, like maybe I should just kind of give in to the pressures and not keep going and put it aside and focus on other things, or really reinvent myself. But I found a way to reinvent myself, and I definitely had to reinvent myself. And you have to learn from your environment and figure out how to fit into your environment and what your environment needs from you, and how you can sell yourself to that environment as someone important, someone who has something to contribute, not irrelevance, which is how it felt as a new immigrant. So no, it's not just hard work. I think it's you have to use that hard work, and then you have to acclimate yourself to your environment and figure out how to contribute to this environment where you find yourself, not this ideal world that you no longer are in. I mean, I easily could have given up and said, oh, you don't want me, I'm not enough for you, fine, I'll do something else. I've had conversations where people are like, oh, you should just redo your studies and do tax law or do something else, and
Yeah.
not simple.
Not simple. Yeah, it sounds like it was quite of a journey, and I could imagine when you believe that you've been given the recipe for success, and that
Right.
you are actually checking all the boxes, and crossing all the T's, and you are like doing everything like you're supposed to do, and then you get to a situation where those tools or those this checklist doesn't work anymore.
It
But
doesn't match.
that brings the question, and I'm sure that people that are listening have the same question that I have, is why Israel? Why come to Israel? Like, what was at the age of 28, if you were on the top of the mountain in New York and you had achieved everything that you wanted to achieve, what was missing that you decided to come, and have this experience that was probably difficult in the beginning, at least?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question that people ask me a lot when I came here. So I come here and I go to interviews with like deans of law schools, and I was already a law professor. No, that was a little bit later. I became a law professor in 2008, so a little bit later. But I go, and we're like, well, why do you want to be here? You have this whole life there. And I used to hate that question because it was almost like a delegitimization of my whole person, because I chose to be here. I'm here. Don't question why I'm here. Take me for what I am, and let's figure out how I can fit in here and how I can contribute, and do I have a role here? But, I originally came here for my family. My husband's whole family lives here, and I felt very much, I identified with the idea. I mean, I have a very strong Jewish identity, not always. It was a complicated Jewish identity, being the daughter of a survivor, but my father was very committed to Jewish identity and Jewish education. And I think that after going to college in the US and working in the US, I had a strong sense that the future of the Jewish people on this line that I needed to carry on, that was instilled in me, was here in Israel. And my husband wanted to be in Israel, and the kids, it felt like this was the place we wanted to raise our kids. And so it was like, either I do it or my kids will have to do it. So I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the one that's the immigrant. My father was an immigrant. I will be an immigrant. Let his grandchildren grow up in a place that they can really thrive in.
Right. Wow. So
yeah,
maybe we can say that everything you learned on the checklist did help you be successful at the end in this new adventure in Israel. Maybe not the way you thought, but it did help.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't be me. Like, when I think back about like how would I have ever gotten to be the person I am if I hadn't gone through that struggle, and all the struggles that I went through as an immigrant, as a working mother, as a feminist, religious, orthodox, quote unquote woman. All those struggles are part of who I am. They characterize the way I write and what I write about. So your struggles, I think, hone your creativity. They let you reflect on the law, on society in new ways. You can't get there if everything was easy, if you didn't have the struggle. So, I mean, I'm definitely a product of my experiences, both of my upbringing and then the struggles that got me to the place I am now. But, I pride myself on being able to pull from all those different kinds of experiences in my work. And I think that's what makes work, whether you're an entrepreneur or an academic, so satisfying when you can bring in the different parts of yourself, not hide those parts or be ashamed of those parts, but really, on the one hand, I was achievement oriented, and I definitely kind of rejected some of the gender roles I saw in my family growing up. On the other hand, if I think about what I write about, there's an irony there, because I write about valuing caregiving and family law and children's rights and family making and all the things that kind of I resisted. So, it's those struggles that inform your perspective and what makes you able to give a very innovative and new perspective. You don't get there from comfort, from easy.
Right. There's a word that I use a lot, and the people that know me are probably going to say already the word before I even say it, but I speak a lot about alignment. alignment
Right.
between who we are and all the pieces of who we are and everything we went through, and whether it's our upbringing or our choices or the decisions that we make and the struggles that we go through. And the question that that I want to ask you, but it's even like there is the answer already in the question, is because you said it a little bit in between the lines, don't you think that you've reached a greater or a more aligned way of being who you are by being here than if you would have stayed in New York, having this whole checklist figured out? Like, wasn't it a way for you to also explore all those dimensions of Jewish identity and being a Jewish woman and living in Israel? Was that a way for you to align yourself more to all those parts of yourself rather than what you would have achieved in New York?
I mean, so I'll challenge that a little bit. So on the one hand, yes, and I'll get back to that. But on the other hand, in order to get where I am today, I have to be honest about some of the things that I put myself through, because when I first came here to Israel, I worked as a lawyer for a year and a half or so. And then I realized that I was not going to be able to continue doing that, and that I really needed to pursue my academic goals. And I wound up moving my family back to America for a while and commuting. And I sacrificed a lot during that time period. And I only get to this place here after getting tenure in the United States, which allowed me to be recognized as a full professor in Israel and writing a tremendous amount, more than I think typical Israelis write. And I had to prove myself above and beyond. And you sacrifice a lot when you go through that. I had a lot of anxiety leaving my kids, my babies, here in Israel and spending weeks at a time back in the United States teaching. People were like, what are you doing? Men were doing it all the time. They were commuting, no big deal. But a woman with small children doing it, it was, first of all, a big sacrifice. And second of all, I spent a lot of time struggling with perceptions of what I was doing. But ultimately, this was what I needed to do to save myself and to save my voice and accomplish the things that I needed to accomplish. That drive, it needed to find its outlet.
Right.
Ultimately, yes, I come back here now. The state recognizes me, and I have a position. I do bioethics and feminist theory, and I teach a course on Intro to American Law, and I teach in Hebrew, and I've made. I've used that work ethic to get through a lot and get to the place where I am, and it's great. But being an immigrant is hard.
Right, definitely. And you know what? I want to really salute you for being honest and showing the vulnerable part and saying the truth, because we hear a lot of people that say, yeah, come to Israel, this is the place where that no one says it's easy, but sometimes people skip that part and say this is the place where you belong, this is the place where you're going to be you're going to be happy or fulfilled, and yeah, it is a struggle, it is a challenge, and like what you're saying, like even if you come with all the degrees and all the recognition, there are some things that have to be overcome here. But I can't help but seeing that this was part of a bigger plan for you to be aligned with, in those different dimensions and
those different parts of yourself.
Like
I could write being Israeli now. I remember the first time for years, I was in conferences in Israel, and I was identified as the American speaker in it. I took it because that's what they wanted to tag me as, and that's what got me invited. And so I actually got paid more because they identified me as an American. But I remember the first time we were like, you're really Israeli. And I was like, yeah, and having the sign on me that, oh, I'm now an Israeli. And so as an Israeli, you could pull in like, oh, my background as an American and my background as somebody who studied Jewish law. And I'm able to after a long time of feeling rejected for the complexity that I brought to the table, it's, you get to a point where you just look at yourself in the mirror, and I am my complexity. I am unique in my ability to teach Intro to American Law in Hebrew to Israeli students.
Right.
And and you find the benefits. But I think that's really important, is to not shy away from your complexity, how you're not like an easy fit for something, but learn how to embrace it and sell it as a positive.
Right. Yes. Amen to that. That's really perfect. I love that. And you speak also about preserving the essential me, right? As a mother, as a wife. Tell us more about what you mean by preserving your essential me in this journey.
I think that at some point, particularly around having small children and being an immigrant and the need to travel, that I felt overwhelmed by the demands, and I felt like my voice being squelched. That thing that I felt that I was here to create, the writing, the teaching, the connection with the law, talking about feminist theory and the different sides of womanhood and Jewish law, and bringing all these things that were in my head that I felt needed to come out. And I felt like I was very close to feeling like I had to give it up, because it was too hard. And so finally, the need to preserve that voice led me to commute and build my career from the US to then bring it back to Israel. But I feel like, ironically, it saved me. On the one hand, I sacrificed so much, but it saved me for my children. It saved me for my marriage. It saved me for my career, because I needed it. And so I feel like you have to know your own needs and your own limits. You can only give so much of yourself, sacrifice as a mother, as a wife, as a Jew, as a woman, as an immigrant. And then at some point you say, you know what, I hit my limit and I have to get on a plane, and I need to teach American students for now so that I can keep this arc going. And like, obviously now I sit back and go, oh yeah, it was worth it, because now I can do what I do here. But like at the time, I didn't know that it would all work out so nicely, and you have to take a leap to save yourself, and patience, time.
Right.
It's not going to all be perfect at one time, particularly as an immigrant. And we, the struggles are what define us and what make us help us get beyond the typical. But while you're going through the struggle, that's very hard. And you just
what I'm hearing is a drive, right? I'm hearing a drive that is brave, and that is, even if you did try to fit in, the box that was at the time, maybe staying here and giving up on this voice, this what you call your essential me. But then going back to the US was for you a way to give room for that voice. And I think that this is a great lesson for anyone who is, hesitating or not sure if, their voice is being heard. And while I was listening to you, you spoke about, being a mother, being a wife. And I'm going to ask a question that's maybe very cliche, but I feel like, this is also the Jewish Women Entrepreneurs Podcast. So we also speak about the women aspect. But do you think that it's more difficult for women to preserve that essential me than it is for men?
I mean, I do. I think that we still, despite all our advances, and obviously I'm not trying to say that things haven't changed, and they have, but we are still, particularly in more religious Jewish communities, there is an expectation about our caregiving roles and the expectations that we will sacrifice more than men, and men have this drive. They are the money makers. They're the ones. In Israel, actually, I find more egalitarian in this effect, but certainly from where I came from and in immigrant communities that we live in here, I didn't know one other woman at the time who was commuting back to the US. I mean, I think that women are expected to be the mothers for those years, and being a mother has meaning, and it's about sacrifice and caregiving and not taking care of yourself, taking care of someone else. So the act of preserving my essential voice, I would be defensive about it being kind of a selfish thing. In the end, I really do come to a place of like, everybody needed me to do that. It wasn't going to be good if I didn't. But at the time, it felt so selfish. So selfish.
Well, on the one hand, it felt selfish, but today we can see how it was courage, and it was being brave, and it was, defending your voice. And you said, said something like, I didn't know where it would bring me, but
Right.
we know where the other option brings, right? The other option definitely brings to, maybe not feeling, yourself, not being
Right.
fulfilled, probably being, looking at yourself with a different perspective. And so that we know is not going to bring something good. But when we listen to our voice, and of course it has, the prices that you're talking about and the sacrifices, but I feel like your life lesson is really, about having the courage to make those difficult decisions so that we listen to our voice and that we are, make room for that essential me. So yeah,
Yes, that women have a right to have that voice. And if there's something, whether it's being a nurse or an entrepreneur or an academic or going back and getting another degree, which I love, that is very common here for older people to go back and get degrees, to keep building that voice, keep finding that voice. We're not supposed to sacrifice everything.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
unless that's what your voice tells you to do. But
Right.
I spent all my time talking about how we need to value caregivers, and I'm a caregiver, and we all need to be caregivers. So that is definitely part of my story. But that doesn't mean that if something is driving you, then you need to find your outlet.
Oh yeah, that is exactly our voice, and this is our cause, right? The Born to Do business this is the cause, right? It's really finding what is your purpose and fighting for it. Fighting for it means also maybe having to be overlooked by people that don't think the same thing as you, but having the courage to do that. There's another thing that you speak about that I found really interesting, and we all know Sheryl Sandberg, her book Leaning In, or Lean In actually. And you speak about the new leaning in and finding balance. So first of all, I would love for you to write a book about that. That would be great. But before you write the book, like, what do you mean by the new?
What do I mean? Yeah. So this is something in my own head. It's something I've written about. But I think about when I first heard her talk about her book, and I heard I think it was a TED Talk, but I don't remember exactly when I heard her speak. But she talked about leaning in, and I watched it, and I was like, so frustrated by it, because so many women, I was one of them, had all this ambition and we want to lean in, but we don't know. It's more than that. We need to figure out how, where, in what capacity, how do we deal with our families? It's not so one-dimensional. Just lean in. That just, it made me angry, because I felt like it would make women feel guilty for not doing it when they want to do it. It's so much more complicated than that. And I really think that you do need to keep pushing your ambition, but it's not one dimensional. I remember when I was teaching in the US, my colleagues here, and I used to come and visit every other semester or every fourth semester as much as I could so I could be with my kids. They would say, well, it'll be easier for you to get a good job here in Israel if you move up in academia in the United States. And I'm like, what? I'm going to go to Kansas or go to Missouri? I can't. There's, it's not just leaning in. You have to find a balance. You have to acclimate to your environment and not feel like if you don't do everything for your career, you're not doing enough. You have to acclimate and find a different vision that works for you, because you won't be happy if you give up your whole family. It's about finding balance. It should be that way for men. It should be that way for women. On the one hand, don't give up your voice. Don't give up your ambition. On the other hand, you don't have to work on some model of ambition and performance that doesn't make sense to you. You have to recreate it and find your own way. And so the new leaning in is about balance. It's about perspective. It's about using different models of leadership and success that aren't based on an old world model of 100% to your career, and you don't have kids, and you have a husband, or you have a spouse to take care of your kids. That's not going to work for women today.
Right. Right. I mean, I love it, because I did hear that, criticism around, I love Sheryl Sandberg and her book, but I did hear that criticism around the fact that a lot of the responsibility is put on the women. basically like the women didn't do what they were supposed to do, and
they didn't lean in, right?
They were supposed to do more, or they weren't aware of what they were supposed to do. And I heard that already, but I love the fact that you're saying basically you can't do like just the opposite of what happened until now. You have to find like the right balance between what happened until now, what you want to happen, and how you can find yourself in the middle. And that is going to be like
part of who we are caregivers. And like, remember my first time I presented at the American Association of Law Schools, it was on a panel about the women's leadership. And at the time, Hillary Clinton had just lost Sarah Palin. It was Sarah Palin and Hillary Clinton. I think Sarah Palin was the vice presidential candidate. Hillary Clinton had lost the nomination to be the Democrat nominee. And there was this whole conversation about what is women leadership. And my whole take was that if we judge women's leadership, if we judge all leadership based on these male role models of 100% into your work, we'll never live up to it. But we need to use our own wisdom, which is that we need to find the balance of caregiving and time. And men need to do this also. And our leadership models need to look different, and that's okay. We need to recreate. We need the revolution.
Yep.
We can't just pretend that we're men of a different century and expect that to be the model.
Right. I think that what you're saying is that it has to, like, the whole context has to change. Like the
Right.
the reference cannot be what it was until now, and women have to enter that reference. We need to create a new reference for men and for women, for both, because
Correct.
men also want to be caregivers and want to also have a balance, and it wasn't also the right thing for them either. We're going to end with the last question. And this question is, I think this podcast is the proof of that, but I'm going to let you say it or not. But you talk about taking ownership of your own narrative, like taking control of your own narrative and telling the story, even if you're changing identities, but finding the glue between all those identities. And I'm hoping that this podcast was for you a way to also be able to bring your narrative. But what do you say? What do you mean by that? And do you feel like you own now your narrative with all those different pieces of identities?
Right. Well, we're always building our narratives, but I just remember as an immigrant here, people said to me things like, you can't teach in Hebrew, you can't teach Israeli law, you're not going to be able to get a full-time job here. And like, if you let other people define you, then you've let them put you in a box. And I think that we need to recreate, make our own boxes and sell ourselves. I have a global perspective. I can teach comparative law. I do bioethics. I do other things. It took time for me to understand that, but you can never let other people define you. And you take the parts of yourself, all of it, without shame, and you put it out there, and you don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't do. I can also commute back to the US and teach if I needed to. And when you show people that power, the power to redefine yourself, it does get respect. We're complicated, and if we're honest about it, people take it. But if we have shame and we try to hide, then that's when we're vulnerable.
Yes.
And so let it out. Be who you are. You have to be brave to teach in Hebrew. I certainly had students making fun of me for a while. But ultimately, if you just laugh at yourself and say, yeah, I make mistakes in Hebrew, they also learn to appreciate it.
It's definitely your inner journey that is going to define how people are going to see you, or what you let people see in your journey. So wow, this has been fascinating, Pamela. I mean, I have to say, very, very impressive, because you're being so raw at the same time, being very honest and just saying it as it is. And at the same time, there's so much wisdom and so much that we can learn from your journey. And I know that if people are listening to us, they don't live in Israel, they're going to say, oh my God, becoming an immigrant in Israel is so difficult. But the truth is that you're a proof that it might be difficult, but at the end of the day, like you said, it's those struggles that define who we are. And I think just a pretty good place today. But go ahead.
Yes. So just a plug for my book, which is Global Reflections on Children's Rights and the Law, is very much a bringing together of the different parts of me. It has a global perspective. We have articles in the book from all over the world. I talk about Brit Milah and female genital mutilation in my article. And it just brings together this kind of global perspective and also domestic perspectives, talks about children who are vulnerable and who need our care. So there are many ways to express your voice and to find an ability to bring it all together. And I think my book culminates that. And so it was
the last book, which we'll put the link of the book in the summary of next to the podcast. Perfect. So that if people want to know more about you and know more about this whole all the pieces of the puzzle that you brought together in that book, I think that it's a great way for them to know more about that. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much
for being with us for half an hour, for sharing your wisdom, and I can't wait to hear what's next for you. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot from you. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you so much.